Hi, I'm Dean Sage.
And I'm Jack Curvin,
And this is Show Me Your Deck,
a podcast where we explore the intersections of oracles and chakras.
using our original decks to create new insights. Welcome back.
Welcome back.
We broke our tradition. We recorded one episode each a week, so it felt like we have had more momentum, but then I forgot to give you episode 7. So episode 7's not going up when we thought it was going to go up.
It'll get out there. It's fine. It's fine.
But we're ahead. We always stay ahead, which is good because neither of us has like all the time in the world. I had another podcast where I was out of work. I was kind of doing gig work. So I had 10, 12 hours to spend on it every week. And you can get a lot done when you have a part-time job of doing podcasting.
Oh yeah. If that's your focus, then you can get a whole lot done. Hold on, let me make sure I've got my correct dice here.
Well, those are very important to the process.
That. Yes, very important to the process. I have a kitty cat looking at me. He thinks these dice look like a fantastic game.
Oh yes,
I was like, okay,
I have Kitty
right.
Magic as well. She's been in the daddy lap 3 times since I woke up like an hour ago, and now she's laying on a towel next to me because I put it on the desk so that she would kind of calm down.
Mm-hmm.
And
did it work?
I mean, so far, yeah, she's pretty calm. When I do
contain
work,
the kitten magic.
when I work from home, she tries to like get up on you, and with the towel, it's my spouse's towel from a shower, so it smells like them, and it kind of gives them some comfort, and they just wallow in it.
Nice. Yes, kitten magic.
Kitten magic. Shall we get it rolling? Literally,
get it rolling. All right, let's roll it. Literally roll it, and we're going with deck number 2, which is the professions deck. So literal, straightforward language, and we're going to use card number 43 because we always start up high.
we really do seem to start up high lately.
Okay, let me grab number 43 here.
Did you check those dice? Are they loaded?
I don't know. But this is the first intersection in Sahasrara. So this is crown chakra, very beginning of the crown sequence. Number 43 of 49 is, I profess that I know dynamic balance is more ideal than static perfection. I profess that I know dynamic balance is more ideal than static perfection.
Okay. I mean, I'm initially feeling called out just because I was talking about having time to do podcasting and getting episodes to you.
Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's quite a way to start. I think I feel a lot of work vibes creeping in here.
Same.
Yeah.
Totally the same.
Yeah.
Being a perfectionist is well, frankly, it's a pain in the ass.
Well, and we will pick that up in our members only segment. We'll kind of talk a little bit about our own life's reflection upon today's reading. But I think she came ready. She absolutely came ready.
She's guns out.
So dynamic. What was that? Dynamic what?
Dynamic balance is more ideal than static perfection.
Dynamic balance. So I was just looking at Tumblr before we started, and I saw a little GIF of them cleaning the statue of David.
Oh,
which is pretty much. I mean, I think among Western art, at least in a Western context, the David's pretty much the prime representation of that era, that time period of Renaissance art. Sistine Chapel. I mean, some people are going to debate over sculpture versus paintings, but honestly, I think more people have probably seen and could identify David on site than could see a panel from the Sistine Chapel and identify it on site.
Yeah, unless you're looking at the creation of Adam, that one's
pretty. Yeah, but like I wonder how many know it, you know what I mean? Versus just,
but they might not know the title of it. Whereas you see this, it's like, oh, David.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of what I'm getting at. Like there's a familiarity with David that I think is, so it's interesting though, because David is quote unquote static perfection. Mm-hmm. and you have dynamic balance here. Now we have to go to movement for this because we can't not. What when you wrote this, what does dynamic balance mean to you?
So as a dancer, you're generally needing to control your core and center of gravity so that you can perform whatever the choreography is. Now, of course, there's going to be exceptions to that where you very specifically are falling or purposefully working off center. But let's look at ballet, for example. Generally speaking, that needs to be working from a place of verticality and control. It's like geometry, linear geometry, and of the body. So there's this ideal in ballet that you're always lifting up, 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 pushing down to go up, reaching up to go down, all these lines. And it's impossible to maintain that. At some point you will fall off balance and you will fall out of perfection because ballet is constantly striving for literal perfection. And it's a very vicious form of dance. But what I was thinking is if you're constantly trying to live up to that image of the body, if you're constantly trying to move from that sense of linear geometry where everything's like a compass and ruler drawing all the movement, that cannot be sustained. And if you try to live in that place, you will be torn apart by your own judgment, by the comments from others, and taking that idea and putting it out into the rest of life. It's better, it's more ideal, living your life, to give yourself enough grace to know that you're going to move in and out of balance, rather than trying to constantly live up to this static, perfect statue of David ballet posture. It would be more ideal to allow yourself to be organic, to pass in and out and keep striving for balancing, failing, and then going forward again and not tearing yourself down for not living there permanently. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then how do you take that and put it out into the attitude you have towards the rest of living and towards other people?
Interesting. Very interesting.
If your ideals are crystallized, then you're just never going to occupy that space. You just can't.
I relate to this from a creative standpoint. I see a lot of striving for something that's ideal, but what's interesting about it is because it's an ideal formed in your head, so you see the perfection. I think, like, I relate this to Michelangelo a little bit, like being able as a sculptor to perfectly see the creation and then chiseling away at the marble to achieve it. You're never going to get to that image that you had, that preconceived notion, because it was crystallized and it was impossible, and you can only kind of achieve it. Like you can only uncover it to a certain degree. You're going to have a missed stroke somewhere. Mm-hmm. You know, I wonder what David looked like to Michelangelo after he was finished. I wonder what kind of internal monologue there was about that. Did he, see it and move on? Did he consider it his greatest work? I mean, these are interesting.
Do you know what I think is his greatest work?
What?
Pietà.
I would have to agree with that, but that's because the emotion that is.
I've seen that one in person. It's behind glass now because a crazy person came at it with a hammer years ago, and they had to spend years and years and years gluing it back together. I'm pretty sure it's the original behind glass. Otherwise, I'm not really sure what the point is, but I'm pretty sure I've seen the original in person. And whether it's a replica from a cast or the original, whatever, it is uncanny. Just, this is a piece of rock. And yet the emotion pouring out of it, the sorrow coming off of it, the physical pain, the flesh, the bone, the hair, the cloth. It's extraordinary. I mean, I saw David in person. I was like, yes, David. But I was like, oh no, this is way better. The Pietà, in my opinion, is absolutely marvelous.
Well, I remember taking you to the Rodin Museum in Philadelphia.
Oh, I love the Rodin Museum.
And watching you interact with the art was so informative. We'll have to see if that comes up in another episode. But Rodin's an interesting figure for me too, because I feel like he represents dynamic balance in the regard to what we're seeing. Like there wasn't the same sort of drive for perfection in his work. I mean, he was striving for something, but like every work of his, I see the striving, like I see the motion toward something.
Well, and that makes his material look more organic and more alive, perhaps more relatable in some ways, because you can see the chisel marks. You can, or not chisel marks, but you can see the process when you're looking at David or Pietà. All that's buffed away. It's extraordinary. It's like, how do you get it this glass smooth? It's extraordinary.
There's a smooth veneer to it. There is, at that time, I think there was an expectation of perfection and, you know, getting to that level.
Well, the way they defined morality was so much more specific and unforgiving and inflexible. So that would make sense.
Their art would reflect
that. What their ideal of perfection is looks different from ours. Our ideal of perfection is that the individual defines themselves and finds some kind of equilibrium within themselves. That's not the way they saw individual people back then. We were supposed to, as individuals, seek to be part of a broader community of perfection. That's not the case anymore.
Well, we certainly have some good examples for this card. We haven't talked about the shock roll part of it. So this is very high up for you.
This is, crown on crown.
Crown on crown. I'm interesting that crown on crown made you think of balance. Only because root on root is what makes me think of balance.
Mm-hmm. Well, the card is saying, is a reminder to not try to be perfect, to find balance in striving for perfection, recognizing that perfect the way you envision it may not actually be a static image of perfection. So as you're, reinforcing your sense of purpose and morality or philosophy, remember that in all this striving to leave room for breath and living and mistakes, that the mistakes are part of the perfection. Because what I find, even in the woo-woo community, people get very earnest about what they believe, whether it's pagans or Catholics or witches or yogis or anybody. People get this idea about the way something is supposed to be, and then they get just as dogmatic as anybody else. So it's a reminder to let go of that dogmatic, unforgiving vision of perfection and remember that you are a living creature and you are not made of straight lines.
This is the impossible connection. And I go back to, I think it was our last episode where we talk about being, part of the cosmic ocean, part of the great other, and being still physically here in this body, this shell.
I know we discussed it. Yeah.
We're kind of back there again, but this is the impossible. This is crown touching crown. This is the universe touching itself and still being experienced by an individual. And it really is the impossible connection. The crown touches everything else, but to have the crown touch itself is such an interesting, like that, your system brings it up so interestingly, because how does the universe, the expansiveness, the infinity touch infinity, and yet you're still there? Like that's,
Well, everything about spirituality has to come from a place of ego. Otherwise, if there's not that separation, then there's no understanding of the possibility of infinity anyway. You have to start from a point of ego in order to see that you have somewhere to go back to.
It's interesting that you say ego, because taken in its negative connotation, it goes right back to what you were just talking about with dogmatic views and thinking that you have the explanation, you have the insight. And again, I go back to Zen in this regard. I think, very very pointedly, they never claimed to have it. Even those that, had achieved enlightenment never, said, well, this is the way.
Yeah, it's great because I get to say, I don't know. I just channel the stuff. I'm just telling you what the card told me to tell you. And so it allows me to play and investigate without putting the burden of responsibility on me. It's like this is a reminder, not an explanation.
I do like how you use the word reminder. I think that's we haven't really talked about that. We just kind of used it on the podcast because it fits with your system. Mine, I think of more as readings, but reminder works equally as well. It does have a very particular understanding to it that is different than saying, I'm channeling the universe into the cards, or the universe is speaking to me through the cards. There's an interesting kind of playfulness to reminder.
Well, and with Oracle, the message is coming through me, but you still need to interpret what's brought to you. So, okay, I was moved to create this profession. It doesn't mean I have to explain it to you. That's not my job.
That's true. So, all right, we're starting off high. We're starting off with the context. As always. We're starting off with the context of striving for dynamic balance. So active balance. This is an active action. So you're in a moment of active balance. Maybe it's among different things. Maybe it's to deal with your spirituality. It could very well be.
And wait, what you just said is important. The active striving, because if you achieve static perfection, you no longer have to work anymore. It's static. What you just said is very important. It's an ongoing process.
So that's where you find yourself right now, is in some sort of ongoing process. It doesn't feel like you're achieving it, and yet externally, I can tell you for sure that you are balanced, that you appear balanced to the others around you. And I think that's the reason that I went to artists and I went to creators and things like that, is that they never see the work the same way that others do. They can't, because they're too far inside of it. They're too close to it. And so they will always see the flaws or the things that they don't feel that they accomplished, or the leftover story nuggets that they didn't explore because they didn't feel like they had the ability or the time. They're always going to see the imperfections. And so I think, Michelangelo looking at David would see a flawed, incomplete statue, whereas all of us look at it and see a marvelous wonder. And then to think of the Pietà, how even there, which, could easily be one of the great masterworks. And
something else to consider, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I remember reading that because David is so tall, because he's like 12 or 15 feet tall, and then he's on a podium on top of that, he actually has to be distorted so that when you look at him from below, he actually looks correct. And if you were to be on eye level with him, he actually isn't perfect. If I remember this correctly, that he has to be distorted in a way that when you look up at him from that far underneath, he looks normal. So even when something does look perfect, it still might be distorted.
I mean, that's very true. The perspective of things make things look very different. Like the photo I saw had a scaffold erected, and there was two men on like two different levels, and they still didn't make up the height of the statue. And having the perspective of human beings in the shot make David even more impressive because of the
well,
the height.
It reminds me of the photographs I've seen online where you find these sidewalk or street artists who will do a mural, and they have to take into account the visual stretching. And so they'll make something look three-dimensional, like this is a hole you could fall into. It's not. If you look at it bird's eye view, it looks weird. But when you stand there facing it, it's been distorted and shortened or lengthened in such a way that it looks, if the optical illusion is extraordinary, and people will walk around it to avoid falling into it. But if you could see it from above, it doesn't look anything at all like anything real.
Yeah. No,
So perspective is absolutely critical to understanding all of this.
So there's your context. Is your perspective can't be on the perfection that you're seeking. Your perspective needs to be on the dynamic balancing that you have to be doing, but also remembering that external to yourself. So this is crown touching crown. So this is the universe looking back at you. You are in a state of perfection. It's a dynamic state, but you're not. You're achieving what you need to achieve. So I think there's kind of a you're okay subtext to all of this.
You're okay.
You're okay.
You're okay. You're okay.
All right, we're gonna see if we continue the sassy trend with my deck here. A lot of energy on this card, that's for sure. Somebody wants to talk here. Okay, so we have the Four of Storms. The Four of Storms. Even the wind lies still for a time.
Do that one again.
Even the wind lies still for a time.
Only a short time, but yeah, it's true.
Mm-hmm. There's a sense of stillness right here in this card that we were just talking about this. There's this card famously is the Four of Swords, and it follows the Three of Swords, which I think is another one of those images that everyone has seen, even if they don't know what it is. It's a heart with three swords stabbed through it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I think everyone, at least in a Western, again, I'll say in a Western context, I think that image has proliferated and people recognize it. Maybe one of the most recognizable tarot symbols because it's so visceral. A heart being stabbed by three swords is so visceral.
And this is the Three of Storms in your.
Well, so that would be the Three of Storms. So this card directly follows it.
Oh, okay.
And there's a lot of angst and energy around the Three of Swords, the Three of Storms. So the Four in this case brings a moment of respite, a moment of quiet. Mm-hmm. So after, if you look at the tarot as a progression, and that's how I do, it's sort of a story unfolding after this very contentious, dynamic step of the three. Then you get to the Four, and there's a breath. There's a moment, and Four is a balanced number, is an even number. So I think we're right back to balance. There's a little bit less motion in this card than there is in the one that we drew for you. There's a little bit more stability to this card. It's the color red, which makes us think of the root chakra in my deck, but I picked red because storms and air and swords in the tarot had such dynamic meaning, such back and forth. They're swords. I often feel like swords are kind of the maligned suit because they're always like, oh, it's bad. Swords are bad. No, air's not bad. Air is air, and it has beneficial properties, and it has storms. And storms are good and bad. They bring destruction, but they also bring life, and there's that dynamic quality to them. So this is just a message that says, even those winds, even those strong winds that blow, even the breezes, sometimes it just goes still, and that's an okay moment to be. So in this larger context of this balance that you're doing, there's a message to say it's okay to be still for a moment. It's okay to stop striving for a moment.
Literally take a breath.
Yeah, take a breath.
It's interesting. I just finished reading a book about breath. I think it's called Breath, the Art of a Lost Science, or the Science of a Lost Art, or something like that. And it spends a lot of its time talking about the ways in which you benefit from controlling the duration and frequency of your breathing. And it was explained that when we breathe either too much or too little, the amygdala is triggered, and you get all these different panic responses and fight or flight responses. And what I'm getting from the book and now our reading here is that literally taking a breath, taking a moment to be centered and present, gives you the space to figure out what to do next. It's quite literal. Take a breath. In the midst of all this striving, in the midst of all this quote unquote perfection, in the midst of all this personal growth, it's okay to be still. It's okay to take a breath. In fact, physically speaking, you really must do that, because if the carbon dioxide gets imbalanced in your blood, that is one of the triggers for anxiety. And then when people get an anxiety attack, they might start hyperventilating, which just makes it worse. So one of the best ways to control anxiety or fear is, if you can be present and remember to do it, try to slow your breathing down so you get 5 or 6 breaths per minute, and take that time to reconnect with balance and stop worrying about the perfect. A lot of times when I feel anxiety is about failure, or the idea that something will fail, the anticipation of it. And at least in the West, it seems to me that we're all held up to these impossible standards, and we don't give ourselves enough grace to take the time to just breathe. And here's your card, 4 of Storms. Sometimes the air needs to just be still, and that's good. It's healthy. It's part of the dynamic balance.
I think you just said something very interesting that also, we've been talking about Michelangelo, and obviously there's, great sexism and misogyny when it comes to the older world, the older Western context, even though I should say not just the older one, the modern one as well. But, there will have been unknown artists of this time period who did not have the opportunities and the connections that Michelangelo had to be able to access the materials to make something like David.
In the training or whatever.
Mm-hmm. And there's a sense there of, you don't always achieve what you think you're to achieve. And I think I'm just thinking of you in particular when you just said, your fear of failure. Sometimes you're too early. Sometimes you're too late. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you just don't reach the window. You just don't make the window. So I think if this reading is speaking to you as something about creation or the act of creation or your creativity, that it's okay to pause. And sometimes that pause feels like failure because it's not active. We're told in the Western context that everything must be active. It must be all the time.
Yeah. Well, think about the sin of glut, or what is it? The sin of luxury. Mm-hmm. That you're not up and around being industrious at all hours of the day and night. That means you're lazy. Mm-hmm. And slothful. And what is wrong with just resting? Why do I have to be so busy? I mean, even Benjamin Franklin was the one who coined early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. I mean, even our founding fathers are all over us about this. It's like, just let me sleep.
I had such trouble sleeping this morning because I set my alarm back so I would have sleeping time. But I'm so used to getting up at 6 that basically between 6 and 10, which is when I wake up so that I can be present and alive at 11 for our recordings, I had this constant sense of the alarm should have gone off. The alarm should have gone off. I should be up. I should be doing something.
Well, and look at what we call that, an alarm. Mm-hmm. My alarm should have gone off. Why do we have to set alarms to wake up? The entire concept is irritating to me.
Well, and the 4 of Storms is saying to take a pause, to take a breath, that even the wind doesn't work all the time. Mm-hmm. And it's okay. So it's okay to have a fallow moment, right? It's okay not to be incredibly creative. I've been working on a campaign for our Dungeons and Dragons, and I've reached a bit of a crossroads where I'm just not quite sure where to go, and I haven't been writing. I've collected a few things. I collected a few monsters that maybe would be interesting, but I've paused the writing, the creative act that I'd kept up for a couple weeks, and that used to feel like failure. And now it just kind of feels like a moment, a break. I'm like, okay, it's just now's not the time. That's all right.
It's crop rotation. Mm-hmm. It's land rotation. I mean, you literally have to let the ground lay fallow for a season. Mm-hmm. Just leave it alone. See what grows.
It's important to rotate through. So in this dynamic balance, in the overall context that we have here of this dynamic balance and the seeking for perfection, or learning not to seek for it, or learning to understand that perfection comes from active moments of dynamic balance and not from static moments. Nothing that is frozen is ever truly perfect. We've talked about that.
And even if it were, would you want to live that way? And if that's the case, is it really perfect? Sure, it's an ideal, but if it's static, life moves, period. If something is static, it's very likely dead. Mm-hmm. How is that ideal?
It can't keep up with the motions, the dynamic balancing that life is.
No. And what I'm getting so far from these first two cards is a reminder for grace. Mm. Whoever's listening right now, you probably work really hard. Most Americans are very industrious people. And you probably have earned a little bit of congratulation. You've done good. Take a moment. It's okay to rest.
I'm also hearing that industrious is something different for everybody. And probably the biggest people feeling the sense of failure are the ones that have, a wheelchair, right? Or have nerve damage, and it takes them 5 times as long to get ready. And that industriousness is what's haunting them.
Or the expectation of it. Mm-hmm. Because part of the problem is if everyone's sense of industriousness or accomplishment is different, then compared to people who are super extraordinarily gifted at it, then if you're being held to that kind of a standard, then it can feel like you've been a disappointment. But Einstein was special because he was Einstein. We aren't all Einstein.
No.
And we don't all have to be.
Would you not? And just executive function, I have trouble with executive function. And if I didn't, I probably would be writing many, many books. I'm glad you brought that up, because I've been working on mine, but I've taken months off from it because I had to have surgery. And I literally slept the month of May. I had to rest. And then other stuff came up. And in June and July of this year, 2024, I had to work on the class that I'm now teaching every weekend. I had other events I had to prepare for. Now we're getting to the end of August. I still haven't picked the novel back up, but now it's starting to tap me on the shoulder. Now it's starting to get a little impatient with me. Mm-hmm. But I needed to quite literally rest. But the ideas needed to rest. And I needed to feel excited about it again. I'm not a full-time writer. I'm doing it because I love the story I'm trying to tell. And I needed to let it sit still for a little while because it was beginning to feel like a job. And it's not my job. No.
It's an expression of my joy and curiosity. But when it starts feeling like work, I don't care what all the bloggers say. I'm not going to sit down and write 5,000 words a day just to do it. You've lost your mind. Then I have to go through and change it all. Mm-hmm. I think that's absolutely terrible advice. That's some of the worst advice I've ever heard, that you just do something to do it to develop a habit. It's like, no, why don't you develop a cycle?
Habits are an interesting thing. I think we'll wait for that to come up in the cards naturally, but I have things to say about that. But I am feeling like we need more context. So we have our overall message, we have our moment of stillness, but there's such a amount of motion to this. And I think the universe itself has so much motion, so much energy that we're constantly able to connect with. Maybe we don't always, but when I do, it feels very energetic, to me at least. So I'm thinking, let's roll some dice and.
Okay. You want one of mine?
Yeah. Let's get one of yours.
Yeah. Deck number 2, staying with what we got. Card number 6.
All right.
Down to Muladhara. We haven't been in the bottom of my deck in a while.
I know.
Any of mine. So this is where the base is affected by third eye. So your sense of safety, balance, health, wellness, identity, all that, how it's affected by the way you perceive the world, the information you're taking in, what you learn, what you perceive.
Connections in there too, right?
Mm-hmm. Hold on, there's a moment of kitten magic happening. What are you doing? So number 6 of 49, I profess that I am vision's fertile garden. Now let's talk about that. I am vision's fertile garden. And you know what we just said about gardens? They need to rest fallow sometimes. You might be a fertile garden, but that means that you're working and learning and being in cycles.
Speaking of burrowing and getting into the dirt, kitten magic is happening on our end as well. We've decided that it's time to burrow into the towel. She literally likes to become like a burrito.
But I love burritos.
She has to dig in. She has to actually like move it with her claws, almost like she's, moving the earth. And then she gets herself settled, and now she's this little lump in a towel on my desk. So images of fertility, images of seeds is what for my root chakra, the image is seeds. And I think,
and let me clarify, this is earth being touched by water. So that's where the fertility comes from in this profession. I profess that I'm vision's fertile garden. The way what you learn influences who you are, and ergo what you create.
So this would be I learn touches I know.
I am.
Oh, I am
touching. I know. I see.
I am touching. I see. Okay. It's interesting to bring us. So for mine, we had the heart chakra. This is the brow and the root chakra touching. Mm-hmm. So we still keep ourselves high, but there's an immediate groundedness to what you've just brought to us. So there's an immediate sinking into the earth. So even that water, which is, hyperfluid, it floats through the air in massive clouds, seemingly impossibly, and falls to the earth. And yet, here it is.
And makes the earth malleable. Mm-hmm. It's where you get clay or, all these other substances like silt. It's all fertile. What I'm sensing here is a reinforcement of the idea that all of this, whether it's, pursuing perfection or taking a moment to breathe, all that is still within reference to yourself. Mm-hmm. And what can be learned in the alternating process of striving and resting, striving, considering, working, sleeping. They're both necessary for you to achieve, well, really anything. And the care of the self is fundamental to that. I mean, there are plenty of stories about tragic artists doing absolutely brilliant work, but I don't know that romantic idea of suffering is an ideal that we should still be striving for. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I don't want to cut my ear off and mail it to somebody. Van Gogh never, ever experienced any of the appreciation that his work still has to this day. I don't know, and even with Charles Baudelaire, he was an addict. If these people had had access to the help they needed and healthier relationships, who knows what they might have been able to do even on top of what they did do.
The tortured poet, the tortured
Charles Baudelaire
soul.
embodies that. My God. Oh my God. I read his biography and it triggered a bipolar disorder meltdown for me that lasted about 3 weeks because I saw so much of myself in him. He's my favorite poet. And I was like, but I'd never read his biography before. I liked the textures of what he was doing. And I liked the ideas that he was implementing. Mm-hmm. But then to actually read his letters to people and what people would say to him in reply and how he descended into all these different forms of addiction and melodrama. It's like, oh no, I see way too much potential here. I threw the book away after I finished reading it. I had it for like 15 years and then I finally read it and then I threw it away. I was like, I never want to read this again.
Well, this is a good moment, right? So this is a good moment because, again, I hear this overarching theme of creativity and connection to the soul. And I believe anything that you do that's soul work is creative work. I think it's working with root metaphors. And I think you have to be incredibly creative to work with your root metaphor, incredibly creative to understand yourself in a image beyond words, beyond knowing type of a fashion, to truly do soul work, to look at yourself as an infinite creature inside of a finite body, and just being able to deal with that duality is an incredibly creative act. So don't feel like this message doesn't apply to you because you're not an author or you're not an artist or you don't really have a creative avenue. I think just the work that you're literally doing, whatever it is that you're thinking about right now, is a creative work. And the idea that we have to be tortured or in pain, I think it's a misunderstanding of existentialism, really.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And to build upon that point, using yourself as the medium of expression, we are all the artist of ourselves. Mm-hmm. So even if you're not painting or dancing or writing or sculpting, you are still the artist of yourself.
Some people have a gift or a talent for external expression that doesn't come to all, and that's okay. And some people have had tortured experiences trying to use it, trying to understand it in themselves, but that is not the norm, and that doesn't have to be you. I don't think you have to suffer through existence. There is suffering. There absolutely is suffering, but I don't think that is a prerequisite of enlightenment or connection or nirvana or whatever it is that you're working to achieve. I don't think that you have to suffer. I think that we have to understand suffering. We have to understand what we find ourselves in this world that isn't fair and doesn't end up the way that it should end up and doesn't reward good people for being good in the same way that it rewards bad people for being bad. You know,
there's also the fetishization of sacrifice. Mm-hmm. That somehow you, through your good intentions, are still somehow diminished and then praised for it is, it's very puritanical in its way. So exquisitely American.
Exquisitely American. Yeah, I like that.
But part of what we probably have to be conscious of is the way in which sacrifice, in my opinion, is overvalued. There's a distinct difference between sharing and receiving as opposed to sacrificing and taking. Mm-hmm. When sacrifice is appropriate, sure, of course, but learn to distinguish, whether it's with your relationships or your work or the conversations you have with yourself. Understand that sacrifice in and of itself is not good. There are times when it's appropriate, but in and of itself is not always the correct answer.
Well, there's especially, with American puritanical Christianity infused Western thought, there is the sense of wrongness to everyone, the idea of inherent evil, of inherent sinfulness. And the only way to escape that is to have someone else be sacrificed for you. And so then you think to yourself, well, then I must sacrifice for others in order to somehow be worthy of this gift and this honor. And I think it's a drastic misunderstanding of gospel texts. And even if you are Christian, I think you've drastically misunderstood the idea of it. It's a gift given to you so that you don't have to suffer.
Exactly.
It's
it was supposed
freely
to,
given.
freely given, yes. But do you believe in salvation and grace or not?
I don't know that even exists anymore. I mean, I'm sure it does. I'm sure that there are those of you listening that have a faith and that live that faith in a way that is consistent and moral and in keeping with the philosophers that you follow, and keeping with the teachings of Jesus or Buddha, or there is going to be people that are religious and not caught in the web that has been created, but externally. So for those of us who are outside of that context, it does not seem like the teachings and the philosophy and the actions align anymore. It seems like it is grown into something completely different.
And to your point about good people being rewarded for good versus bad people being rewarded for being bad, looking specifically at religion and this idea that we have to strive for perfection, we have to constantly be active in doing something. You get people like televangelists who, because you feel like you need to do something, here's an action, send me money.
Mm-hmm.
That's an action. Take that action. That'll make you better. We really have to be cognizant of how our actions are or are not leading us towards dynamic balance, to stop trying to aspire towards static perfection in the first place.
I just had that image of, if you just did these 5 right things, if you just checked off these 7 boxes, then you would be whole again. And again, completely misunderstanding what the Gospels are saying, completely misunderstanding what the letters are saying. It has nothing to do with checking boxes. In fact, there was a huge schism in the early church. If you're familiar, they were called the Judaizers. They came in after the initial disciples and followers came about, and they basically tried to bring Jewish tradition and the idea of sacraments and the idea of actions and checklists and the means to salvation were physical, and they tried to impress that upon the early church. And unfortunately, there was a schism, and they really won at the end of the day because it's easy. It's so easy, and I think that's what I'm hearing here. It's so easy to say, well, just tell me what to do. It's so easy, and it's so easy for someone to tell you what to do and to promise you that this is it. This checklist is it.
Sacrament is an interesting segue here, because looking at baptism, when Christ was baptized by John the Baptist, that was a symbolic washing away of da 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 da. But now people treat it as an actual physical practice that if you do not experience, you are not in full communion. Mm-hmm. But it's just the action of either dunking or sprinkling water on somebody. When Jesus had it done to him, it was for a specific meaningful purpose. You're just listing it, to your point, as a checklist of actions to take. So you're telling me that if I just stand in this swimming pool and let you hold me underwater, that in and of itself is more important than the process of understanding my purpose? This is how we get manipulated into lives of overwork, because we feel like we constantly have to do something.
The same thing is true of woo-woo. The same thing is true of witching, of anything that is organized soul work, anything that is patterned soul work has this failing imminent in it.
It has this risk of becoming dogmatic. It's why I personally prefer to be a solitary practitioner, because when I've tried to be with groups of people, they get holier than thou real fast. It's like me walking down the street, you wouldn't know what my spiritual beliefs are. These are the people who have to wear it. They want to walk around like druids. Blessed be to you, babe. You do you, whatever. But I don't like my facial hair. I keep it trimmed. I'm not going to walk around looking like a druid. or whatever. I don't feel the need to perform it that way. But if you don't, then you're not as, dedicated to it as they are, because they're keeping these old traditions alive and visible. It's like, that's fine for you. That's an expression of what you want to do and be. But when you start acting like other people who don't do it aren't as in it, that's a problem.
That's the trouble with the crown meets the crown, right? That's because it's where the rubber meets the road.
Mm-hmm.
The crown chakra is often pictured above the head, something slightly outside the body, something to strive for. And it's very okay to share your journey and to talk about it with others and have others relate to it and have others interact with it and bring, new ideas. When you share an idea and someone says, "Oh my gosh, when you said that, I thought of this." Like, that's an amazing dynamic process. And that is fellowship. That is the coming together of people, the breaking of bread together, all of the things that you see in religious imagery. But it's not creating static principles that then everyone else needs to achieve. So just because that was your journey, and again, I love Zen, just because that was your journey doesn't mean that it works for everyone else. The monk who put the shoe on top of his head and walked away, and the master said he has reached enlightenment. I cannot put a shoe on top of my head and walk away and claim enlightenment. The manifestation of his enlightenment was the shoe on top of the head, but that was because it was his manifestation, that moment in time, that one person.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I feel like we need a fourth card.
Yeah.
Mine or yours?
I'm going to pull from mine.
All right.
Going near the end of the deck. Okay. We have a green card, which is the seeds. So we're back to the root chakra, which is, I think, where we needed to be. So this is the seeker of seeds. Bare feet upon empty ground, see what soon can grow.
Again?
Bare feet upon empty ground, see what soon can grow.
Do it one more time.
Bare feet upon empty ground, see what soon can grow.
I love that image. I really do. I should walk around barefoot more often. We actually need to do it. It helps balance our energy to make contact with the surface of the earth. But that's a side point. Let's get to your card.
Well, no, that is the card. So I'm reading Women Who Run with Wolves, which was recommended to me 2 decades ago, and I never got around to it. And there was a really interesting anecdote. There was a wise woman who was recounting that she didn't wear shoes until she was in her 20s, and she always felt a little blinded by shoes, that there was knowing through touching the earth.
Oh, that's interesting idea. Yeah. Okay.
I just like that's an interesting kind of facet. But no, this is a very grounded image for me, where you are connected to the earth, bare feet, right? Empty ground. You're connected to the earth, and the seeker is about action. The seeker is about knowledge and is about pre-action. I apologize. It's about pre-action. This is standing in your garden plot and seeing what could be there, but there's nothing there now. And that's okay. You're planning, you're seeking after knowledge, after experience. You're seeking after the thing that you will plant and that then will grow. But that's a whole process. That's a whole activity and miles down the road, perhaps.
This entire reading is starting to feel like a series of reminders about the way in which you envision what your life is supposed to be or what your work is supposed to be. Mm-hmm. The reminder to be aware of getting too far in your head and up above everything and forgetting to take pauses. And here we are, here's the blank slate, taking a moment to just recognize the beauty of potential. Okay, so it's bare ground right now, or it's a blank canvas, or it's an empty stage. It's so far nothing, but it has the potential to be anything.
And there's an existential dread in that.
Yeah.
There's an existential dread, and that's why this is in the root progression. This is why the celestial is meeting the seeker, because this is existence looking at the abyss. Empty ground is anything. It's eternal possibility. And there's a moment of existential dread that overcomes you when you see emptiness and think about existence happening atop that emptiness. And this, again, I mean, it goes right back to artists that I've listened to and I encounter on Tumblr or Instagram, and they're talking about these fallow moments, which is, I think, what we've kind of been talking about this whole reading. But there is an existential dread to the act of creation, the act of starting.
Well, when you have an open space or an empty field or a blank canvas, it can be very, very liberating in that you can do anything. And yet, and this has come up in our conversations before, there's also choice paralysis.
Yes.
Because you can do anything, anything. So once there are trillions of choices before you, you have absolute freedom. Now what?
that just what you said, absolute freedom, philosophically, if you follow any of the sort of modern progression of philosophy, that idea of absolute freedom, once we got away from the deterministic thinking of the things like the church and the medieval context, once we allowed for freedom, then it became terrifying, because absolute freedom is absolute freedom, absolute consequence, absolute ideas, and absolute creativity. There is no rules. There is nothing determining your next step. It's just you and only you. And
you're responsible for the outcome because you're the only one that had anything to do with it. When I was still a high school teacher, there was a video I showed to my class, and one of the women in the video, we ended up doing an entire performance based on this quote. So that's why I remember it so well. I don't remember her name, but she said, "The youth of today have inherited freedom and they don't know what to do with it." And we created an entire school production around that idea. And the name of that performance was Choices. And it looked at consequences.
There's a gay, I don't know what to call it. You know, when we look at something and we're judging it, we just say choices.
Is that a kiki? What is that?
Yeah, that it's a read of sorts, because it fully says choices were made, and they weren't the right choices.
Yes, look at your life choices.
And it speaks to the absolute freedom. I mean, you can wear whatever you want, but there will be others that judge you. And
there's always consequence.
Maybe rightfully so. Like, the best part about a read is its truth delivered in a comedic, fun way, but it's still truth, and maybe it's something to consider.
Yeah. Well, like with the people I know who are practicing that want to look like druids, that cuts them off from all sorts of other stuff. And I don't feel like dealing with that. But they do. They're baptized in that performance of their faith, and that's fine. But I don't want to contend with the stuff they contend with. I have enough going on. So they have their consequences. I have mine. It's fine. And we all just have to figure out what to do with our fallow ground.
So there's definitely an internal external thing happening here. So most of the cards that we've drawn are talking about your internal experience, reminders, messages to look at that balance that you have. This is the second card of mine that's talked about stillness. So the stillness of air, this is the stillness of earth. And those two couldn't be more diametrically opposed than any two elements. I love Avatar: The Last Airbender. Have you seen that show?
Oh yeah, of course.
The hardest thing for Aang to learn was earth because it was so opposed to his natural element, which was air. And it was so interesting, to watch how they developed that progression. Even in a kid's show, they, showed how biases and, ingrained things that you learned as a child affect how you interact with elements, as an adult.
Well, that's what I just pulled with number 6 of 49. That's where earth and water were touching. Same concept, not quite as extreme as with air, but still something very fluid paired up to something that's very solid. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there's consistency in this reading that's quite gratifying today.
And there is a consistency to the messaging. I mean, we'll see what the final card kind of helps resolve for us or cap off for us, but there is definitely soul work happening. And I think it's a reminder that it starts with that eternal connection. It starts with that impossibility of crown touching crown, of being out of the world, in the universe. And yet all of the other cards, we've gone back to groundedness. We've gone back to being within yourself. We've had third eye, we've had heart, we've had root chakra. There's work that you're doing within yourself that is of yourself. And it's looking at that vast landscape of eternity, that vast landscape of interconnectedness, of things that just don't make sense. And you're trying to imbibe them. You're trying to take them in and create a sense of self within the midst of this. And that's, if I go back to the first card, that's it. That's the dynamic motion that's happening of the crown meeting the crown, of the chrysalis of perfection and the chrysalis of dynamic balance. And, it's this beautiful object. Chrysalis is a beautiful object. And yet something so dynamic and impossible is happening within inside of it. A creature is unmaking itself and transmuting into a different creature. I mean, it's so, like, I can't imagine going into a shell and then having my skin dissolve and my organs rearrange and coming out of it something even more beautiful than you could imagine.
And from the outside, it looking like complete stillness.
It blows my, that blows my mind.
I think that's why metamorphosis is such a fantastic metaphor, is because sure, there's a caterpillar to butterfly, but people don't go into the nitty gritty like you just did. They're dissolving, they're reabsorbing, they're rearranging, they're recreating. The basic image is caterpillar, butterfly, but the metamorphosis is kind of gross.
Yes. I mean, there's
kind of disgusting when you think about it.
And there's definitely something not kosher about.
Oh no.
That idea. No, that's
the idea that you have to dissolve yourself completely to rebuild yourself into something else. I mean, that's the part of the metaphor people tend to skip over. It's not just that you start as a caterpillar. No, now I'm a butterfly. It's like, no, honey, you were goopy for a little while there, and now you come out with these wings. And
what's interesting about the goopiness, of course, is that again we go to that external perspective. The universe looking back at you, and you aren't goopy from others' experience of you.
They see the chrysalis on the outside.
Mm-hmm. So they see the static dynamism of what's occurring, and it's okay. I think we keep saying that to you, but it's okay.
It's okay.
It's all right.
What will be really funny is if the last card suddenly comes into something to do with action, because all this has been about planning and consideration and acceptance, and it's all been quite cerebral and spiritual. I will I will flip out if the last card is something about taking action. I'll be like, excuse me, what?
Well, then we have to let the universe speak. So you need to roll some dice.
Oh, God. Okay. Here we go. Let's see what happens. Okay, deck number 1 this time. This is a projection, which the projection deck is how to take action and to do something from the ideas in the book and make them real. So what did we just do? Oh my God. I can't believe it. All right. So leave my house, number 2. Leave my house. The only way that could have been any more perfect is if it had been number 1. Oh my God. If we'd gone from crown touching crown to earth touching earth, I would just like, I'm leaving. I have somewhere to go. I don't know what to say. Okay. So here is earth and how it's affected by metal, how I am is affected by I feel. So getting way down deep into it. And this action deck, number 2 of 49. Fondle yourself constantly. Embrace your little voice. Fiddle your bits. Hug your inner child.
Yeah.
Fondle yourself constantly. Embrace your little voice. Fiddle your bits. Hug your inner child. What did I just say? I need to get a job at LaToya Jackson's hotline. I'm on fire today. Oh my God.
Well, I mean, yeah, I almost feel like we should just end the show. We don't.
Okay,
what else?
bye.
What else do we need to say?
I mean, what would have been funny is if it was number 15. It would have been fire on fire. Just do. But this is I am and I feel. So root and viscera.
Well, this is it. So the I am part can never be understood in its entirety, in its soliloquy. Because you are your chemical interactions and the difference engine of your brain, and that brain is experiencing existence, but you really are your feelings and emotions, because that's how your brain operates, is feelings and emotions and differences and synaptic pathways and neurotransmitters and all these things that essentially lead up to. And in my deck, water is the element for the sacral chakra. But you can't know yourself outside of this connection. So I think this is perfect, because this again, coming back to the goopiness of the chrysalis, although in your case this is metal, right?
Yes.
But this is molten. We've talked about this before. This can be molten metal. This can be.
It can be. It isn't always, but it can be. It needs to be, sure. But without feelings, whether it's sensations or emotions, instinct, there's no input. Mm-hmm. So what's the point of I am without I feel? Mm-hmm. So how is your sense of balance, safety, security, well-being, identity, how's that influenced by the sensations in your body, the emotions in your mind, your instincts, what your little voice is saying to you? The card capitalizes self. So fondle yourself constantly. It's a reminder that unless you engage with your interior, you're going to really understand your exterior. They have to be balanced together to create a whole person. You can't just be your body. You can't just be your feelings. Just your feelings. They're okay. So it's just feelings. Okay. Well, how are you going to take action? How are you going to embody anything if you're just wallowing around in feelings all the time? You still have to be a physical entity as much as a mental, emotional, or spiritual. So embrace your little voice when your instinct is talking to you. Okay. Let it speak. Hear what it has to say. Fiddle your bits. I mean, come on. We all need to fiddle our bits, and hug your inner child. This card is reminding you that there are all these quote unquote intangible parts of yourself that have to be included in the process of forming a complete person. And all of them exist inside your physical self. but you have to always engage with them. And then from there, you can start, looking at all these other processes we've been discussing. But doing it from a position of doing the inner size as well as exercise.
I like that. I like that a lot. I like this card too because it strikes at the dichotomy that I found within the second chakra, which is that not all of sex is sex. Not all of the fluidity of emotion is romance. That there's sort of a conflation of the sacral chakra with the sexual organs, and they exist there. Mm-hmm. They absolutely exist there, but they are not all that is there.
No, not at all.
And there are deep, and in my case, waters, deep emotions that exist in this space. And some of them can be sexual, absolutely. And that's why I love the way that you've written this card, because it has the hint of sexual, but it has hug your inner child, which is such a wholesome, deep emotional act. And it's the physical meeting the emotional. Like hugs, I think hugs, why we like hugs is it's a grounding. It's a physical connection to another that has deep emotional resonance. Mm-hmm. And the idea of hugging your inner child, like just think about that for a second. You're doing this soul work. We didn't talk about it before, but your inner child is really what you're healing, because, like the celestial journey for me, the celestial starts as a celestial creature and becomes physical. And that is a very hard process. Imagine going from infinite to finite. Mm-hmm. And some children seem to retain this knowledge. We've seen, really, really interesting things that children have said, that kind of gives us pause. But, that child starts off with the dichotomy of fear and safety, and it short circuits the brain. Like it short circuits emotions. It happens in your nervous system. Mm-hmm. The idea of fear and safety is below emotion. It's below those feelings. And hugging your inner child is sort of revalidating the safety, of the nervous system, the safety of your body. And this is, we see this in trauma too much. It's almost the definition of trauma. And, we've come to realize that childhoods can be filled with trauma that isn't apparent or isn't always violent, or tied to, death or murder or, violent actions. It can be cumulative effects of traumatic things that shape your nervous system to be responsive in ways that you don't even understand. And, here we are. So you're doing this soul work. Deep within you, there are fears that have persisted, that just stayed with you. And you have to comfort them. You have to hug them. You have to let them know it's okay.
And one of the fears is the fear of stillness.
Yes.
The fear of taking a moment, the fear of allowing ground to be fallow, the fear of not knowing, the fear of not doing. We have to allow ourselves time to recognize that silence in and of itself is not bad. It's not dangerous. It's simply not vibrating. That's all it is. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And even then, it is vibrating. Even silence is filled with so many vibrations, especially in the modern world. But even at a cosmic sense, there's still the microwave background radiation coursing through everything, everywhere.
It's everywhere, all the time.
The universe itself is a constantly vibrating entity. And again, going right back to the first card, the vibrations of the universe touching the vibrations of the universe, and yet there you are in the midst of it.
Well, the idea that reality is constantly expanding. So even when you think something is quiet and still, it's not. And that's okay. Maybe that comforts you. If you're afraid of stillness, just know that it's not going to happen anyway.
Yeah, that's true. But I think definitely there's a message here of overt stillness, or what we consider stillness, is dangerous to you because you have only then to turn within. And now you...
That and the way that we connect agency with action. And if you don't take action, does that mean that you no longer have agency?
That's a good point. That's a very good point. Dynamic freedom.
Yeah. Instead of static responsibility.
Yeah. It's good talk. We have YouTube. We have podcasts. We have a members only section that you get through Apple Podcasts. If you are listening to us or subscribing to us on Apple Podcasts, you'll be able to choose to activate the members feed and get a little bit extra time with us, where we go over how the reading influences us personally and how we're kind of connecting to the reading in a personal fashion. So there are multiple ways to get in contact with us. And of course, we don't do ads because this podcast is an ad. You are here experiencing the things that we've created, and we just ask you to reach out and purchase those things that we've created so that we can continue to be creative. So we appreciate you. And we appreciate you even if that's just not where you're at. If all you can do is consume the content and listen to us and experience what we're creating here extemporaneously together, then we appreciate that as well. Community and sharing of us is just as important as buying of us. So just take a look at there. You can go to showyourdeck.com and connect with our work there. We are on Instagram at Your Deck. We are on YouTube, also Your Deck. And then Jack, where can we find you and your other spaces?
49 Haiku, the number 4, the number 9, HAIKU. So on Instagram, it would be at 49 Haiku. Otherwise, in a browser, it would be 49haiku.com.
And you can get me at Dean Sage Media on some of the socials, and deansagemedia.com is my website. So you can find some of my previous creative works there, which if you are a member, you heard a little bit about that process of creating those moments and how they are somewhat haunting to me now, which I find interesting. But yes, deansagemedia.com. Thank you, everybody.